There comes a moment in every awakened person's life when something irreversibly shifts. Something inside breaks open with such force, such clarity, so precision, that nothing afterward feels the same. You look at the world, at yourself, at the people you once loved, at the routines you once worshipped, as if you've been living underwater your entire life. And someone finally dragged you to the surface for your first real breath. It's not a gentle awakening. It is a psychological earthquake, a spiritual rewiring, a soul-level rupture. And after it happens, you lose things, not by accident, not through tragedy, but through evolution. Loss becomes the currency of transformation, because there are things awakening takes from you that you will never be able to get back, no matter how badly you want to, no matter how hard you try, no matter how deeply you romanticize the old version of yourself. Awakening is not a gift. It's an exchange, a trade, a sacrifice, and the universe is ruthless about what it removes. Once you begin to see clearly, the first thing you lose is the ability to be asleep again, not in the literal sense. In the existential sense, you can never again pretend you don't know what you know. You can never again play small with the same innocence. You can never again unsee the patterns, the illusions, the lies you used to swallow whole without question. You can never again believe the stories you once built your identity around. You can never again fit into the life you outgrew while you were too unconscious to notice. This is why awakening feels like grief, because it is the death of ignorance, the death of autopilot, the death of illusions you once needed for survival. Carl Jung said that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The moment you make your darkness conscious, the moment you bring the unconscious into the light, the spell breaks, the trance ends, and the life you once lived, the one built on numbness, on distraction, in avoidance, dies in your hands. You cannot go back to sleep once consciousness has tasted you. You cannot unknow the truth once it has carved its signature into your mind. This is the first loss, your old blindness. The second loss cuts deeper. You lose the ability to tolerate what once felt normal. Mediocre conversations suffocate you. Surface-level relationships bore you. Noise irritates you. Chaos drains you. Small talk feels like sandpaper against your soul. Environments built on insecurity feel repulsive. People who feed on conflict feel radioactive. Where you once blended in, you now feel like an outsider. Where you once complied, you now question. Where you once played along, you now stand apart. And this is the paradox the awakened person faces. Your growth disconnects you from the world you used to belong to, because awakening sharpens your discernment. It heightens your sensitivity. It amplifies your intuition. You can suddenly feel intentions behind words. You can sense emotional manipulation in its earliest stages. You can detect dishonesty the moment it enters the room. You can see through the personas people wear to hide their wounds. What once fooled you now looks transparent. What once attracted you now repels you. What once satisfied you now starves you. You lose the ability to tolerate the version of life you thought you wanted before you understood what you actually needed. The third thing awakened people lose, and this one breaks you before it frees you, is your former relationships. Not all of them, but most of them, because once you awaken, you start showing up differently. You start speaking more honestly. You start holding boundaries. You start valuing your energy. You stop participating in patterns that drained you for years. You stop allowing dynamics that fed off your silence. You stop giving time to people who only understood the unhealed version of you. And this threatens people, not because you've changed too much, but because your change exposes their refusal to. You lose friendships. You lose lovers. You lose family members. You lose the people who preferred the version of you that didn't know how to say no. Awakening costs you the relationships that were built on your unconsciousness. It costs you the connections that depended on your compliance, your softness, your self-abandonment, your willingness to carry more than your share. When you awaken, you no longer carry what doesn't belong to you, and people who depended on your self-sacrifice call that distance. This is the tragedy of consciousness. You outgrow people faster than you ever imagined, and you cannot shrink yourself to fit back into the places you were never meant to remain. The fourth loss is even more subtle, but it is the one that changes your life the most. You lose your attachment to the identity you once worshipped. The strong one, the smart one, the quiet one, the nice one, the responsible one, the overachiever, the rescuer, the people pleaser, the good child, the dependable friend, the forgiving partner. Awakening burns these identities to ash, because these identities were not you. They were costumes you wore to survive the unconscious environments you grew up in. When awakening begins, the costume falls off, sometimes gently, sometimes brutally, and you're forced to meet the naked truth of who you are. Beneath all the roles you've performed your whole life, this is terrifying, because the person you discover underneath is not the person the world applauded, but it is the one you came here to be. Identity loss is not a crisis. It is an exorcism of everything that was never yours to carry. And then comes the fifth loss, the most painful and the most liberating of all. You lose the desire to be understood. You stop explaining yourself. You stop justifying your decisions. You stop defending your intuition. You stop trying to convince anyone of anything. You stop needing validation. You stop needing agreement. You stop needing companionship to feel whole. Because awakening teaches you that understanding is a luxury, not a requirement. People do not need to understand your evolution for it to be real. People do not need to approve of your boundaries for them to protect you. People do not need to support your transformation for you to outgrow your past. The awakened stop looking for permission to be who they are becoming, and this loss of needing to be understood, creates a new kind of freedom. The freedom to live for your soul instead of for the opinions of the sleeping. Say, continue for me, and I'll flow directly into the next movement of the script. Deeper, darker, more cinematic, as the losses compound and awakening reshapes every corner of your destiny. And once you lose the desire to be understood, once that final thread snaps inside your psyche, something extraordinary happens. Something so subtle, so quiet, yet so profoundly irreversible, that it becomes the true point of no return. You lose the version of yourself that needed the world to recognize your value. And this is where the real awakening begins. Because now you stand alone, not in loneliness, but in sovereignty. Not in isolation, but in clarity. Not in separation, but in truth. You are no longer seeking mirrors. You are no longer auditioning for belonging. You are no longer negotiating your worth. You are no longer bending your spirit to fit someone else's comfort. And the moment you stop doing that, you lose something else, something most people never dare to release. You lose your illusions about people. Awakening strips away the romanticism you once coated the world in. You stop pretending people are better than their behavior. You stop making excuses for emotional immaturity. You stop projecting potential onto people who show you patterns. You stop confusing empathy with self-sacrifice. You stop mistaking trauma bonds for loyalty. You stop assuming everyone has the same heart as you. You begin to see people exactly as they are, and no longer as who you hope they could become. This is not cynicism. This is psychic adulthood. The awakened understand that everyone is operating from their level of consciousness, their level of healing, their level of integrity, and most importantly, their level of self-honesty. You lose the illusion that you can change someone by loving them harder. You lose the illusion that loyalty can fix their wounds. You lose the illusion that patience can rewrite their patterns. You lose the illusion that suffering was meant to be shared just because you understood it. Awakening ends the fantasy that love alone is enough, because now you see, love without self-awareness is chaos. Love without accountability is manipulation. Love without boundaries is self-destruction. And once you awaken, you cannot love blindly anymore. Your heart does not close. It evolves. It loves with clarity, not need. It loves with intention, not desperation. It loves with presence, not projection. And this evolution of the heart costs you one more thing. You lose your ability to stay where your soul is shrinking. Jobs that once felt stable now feel suffocating. Relationships that once felt comforting now feel constricting. Friends that once felt close now feel energetically incompatible. Environments that once felt familiar now feel foreign. This is not because you are becoming ungrateful. It is because you are becoming aligned. Your energy can no longer tolerate what drains it. Your intuition can no longer tolerate what deceives it. Your spirit can no longer tolerate what shrinks it. Your mind can no longer tolerate what insults it. Your nervous system can no longer tolerate what destabilizes it. Awakening rewires your entire being until misalignment becomes painful. The body refuses to stay where the soul cannot breathe. And so you walk away, not out of anger, not out of superiority, not out of resentment, but out of necessity. You walk away because staying would mean dying slowly, in a place you have already outgrown. And this walking away, this courageous, quiet, irrevocable walking away, costs you another thing. You lose the comfort of the known. You lose the predictable. You lose the familiar roles. You lose the security of belonging to the wrong people. You lose the illusion of stability that kept you small but safe. You step into uncertainty naked, with nothing but your intuition and the faint echo of your own becoming guiding you forward. Awakening strips you of the future you planned, so it can give you the future you were built for. The price of this future is high. It costs you everything you thought you needed. It costs you the convenient lies. It costs you the comforting illusions. It costs you the identities that were too small. It costs you the relationships that were unbalanced. It costs you the dreams that were never really yours. It cost you the versions of yourself that were born from fear instead of truth. And if you continue to walk, if you continue to follow the thread of your awakening, even as it unravels your life, you discover something else. You lose the ability to betray yourself ever again. Because once you've met your soul, really met it, not the persona, not the mask, not the survival identity, but the raw, unedited consciousness beneath it all, you cannot return to self-abandonment. Not easily, not willingly, not knowingly. You can no longer lie to yourself without feeling it in your body. You can no longer ignore your intuition without consequences. You can no longer fake connections without feeling spiritually ill. You can no longer force yourself into places where your soul is whispering, leave. Awakening steals from you the luxury of pretending. It forces you into integrity. Not moral integrity, but existential integrity. The kind of integrity where mind, body, soul, and path are finally aligned in one direction. And this alignment, this inner coherence, comes with the final irrevocable loss. You lose your old life, not because it collapses, but because you outgrow it, cell by cell, belief by belief, truth by truth. Your life does not disappear. You simply rise beyond its old shape. You rise beyond its old limits. You rise beyond its old expectations. You rise beyond its old wounds. You rise beyond its old fears. You rise beyond the version of you that accepted less than what you now know you deserve. This is the true cost of awakening. You lose everything that was built on who you were before you knew who you are. And though the losses are devastating, though the grief can feel unbearable, though the shedding can feel like dying, there is one thing awakening never takes from you: your becoming. Say, continue for me, and I'll take you deeper into the metamorphosis, into the expansion, the sovereignty, the power, and the final irreversible transformation that awakened souls undergo. And as you move deeper into this metamorphosis, as each layer of your former self falls away like dead skin, you begin to sense another truth rising beneath the losses. An uncomfortable truth, a liberating truth, a truth most people spend their entire lives running from. You lose the illusion that life happens to you. You begin to see that life happens because of you. Awakening destroys victimhood, not by force, not by ideology, but by exposure. Because once you see your patterns, your choices, your shadows, your triggers, your behaviors, your unconscious loops, once you see how you were participating in your own suffering, you can never again pretend you were powerless. Awakening takes away your ability to blame the world for what your unhealed self attracted. It takes away your ability to blame people for what your old patterns tolerated. It takes away your ability to blame fate for what your silence invited. It takes away your ability to blame life for what your wounds repeated. This is one of the hardest losses of all. You lose your excuses, every one of them. All the stories you told yourself to avoid confronting the truth, all the narratives you created to protect your wounds, all the defenses you built to justify staying small. Awakening exposes the architecture of your own limitations. And after that exposure, you cannot go back to pretending you didn't build them. But in losing your excuses, you gain something infinitely more powerful. You gain authorship. You reclaim the pen. You reclaim the steering wheel. You reclaim your identity, not as a character in your story, but as the narrator. And this shift, this tectonic shift, is where the awakened begin to separate themselves from the ordinary world forever. Because the ordinary cling to comfort, the awakened cling to truth. The ordinary seek validation, the awakened seek alignment. The ordinary avoid discomfort, the awakened enter it like a temple. The ordinary repeat cycles, the awakened break them. And the deeper you walk into your awareness, the more you lose the illusions that once governed your life. The next loss comes like a knife, clean, silent, irreversible. You lose your tolerance for self-betrayal. Where you once abandoned yourself to please others, you now feel physical discomfort at the thought. Where you once silenced your intuition to keep relationships intact, you now feel spiritually nauseous doing so. Where you once agreed to things that insulted your boundaries, you now withdraw instantly, instinctively, without guilt. Awakening makes self-betrayal unbearable, because once you felt the alignment of living in truth, even for a moment, falsehood becomes poison. You can no longer force yourself into friendships where your spirit feels unseen. You can no longer remain in relationships where your heart feels misunderstood. You can no longer tolerate conversations that starve your mind. You can no longer play roles that suffocate your authenticity. You lose the ability to harm yourself, to maintain harmony with others. And that loss, that sacred, non-negotiable loss, is the beginning of sovereignty. But awakening takes even more. It removes one of the most subtle addictions human beings cling to. You lose your need for external direction. You stop asking for advice from people who don't understand your path. You stop looking for validation from people who haven't validated themselves. You stop seeking permission from people who are threatened by your evolution. You stop expecting clarity from people who benefit from your confusion. Your guidance system moves inward, away from noise, away from influence, away from conditioning. Your intuition becomes your compass. Your body becomes your truth detector. Your emotions become your barometer. Your silence becomes your teacher. Your inner world becomes your authority. And once inner authority awakens, the external world loses its power over you. But this inner authority costs you another thing, something few speak about, because it sounds like tragedy. But taste this like liberation. You lose the desire to save people, not because you've become cold, but because you've become wise. You finally understand that you cannot rescue people from realities they are committed to repeating. You cannot awaken someone who loves their illusions. You cannot force healing on someone who feeds on their wounds. You cannot drag someone out of a psyche they are determined to defend. You cannot pour your energy into someone who leaks truth as fast as you give it. This loss breaks your heart at first. You feel guilt. You feel conflict. You feel torn between love and clarity. But then, as the fog clears, you realize something. Trying to save people was the last echo of your own wounds. You tried to save people because no one saved you. You tried to heal people because you wished someone healed you. You tried to carry people because you wanted someone to carry you. You tried to awaken people because you were terrified of waking alone. Awakening removes this. It removes the savior impulse. It removes the martyr identity. It removes the illusion that your love can rewrite someone else's fate. You begin to understand. Everyone awakens on their own timeline, and most will choose comfort over consciousness. So you stop interfering. You stop overgiving. You stop over-explaining. You stop over-investing. You let people walk their path, even when that path leads to their breaking, because you now know that breaking is often the beginning. And then awakening takes one more thing. The most sacred, the most painful, the most necessary loss of all. You lose the life you thought you wanted, the life you were building from your unhealed self, the dreams you crafted from your childhood wounds, the goals you envisioned from your fear of inadequacy, the future you planned before you understood your real self. Awakening dismantles that life gently at first, and then violently when you resist. It ends relationships, closes chapters, burns down plans, reroutes destiny, not to punish you, but to reveal the life you were meant to have. Before the world taught you to self-abandon, you don't just lose your old life, you shed it, like a snake shedding its skin, like a phoenix shedding its ashes, like a soul shedding its identities. And what remains after all the loss, after all the shedding, after all the unraveling, is something no one can take from you: your truth. Your truth is the only thing awakening leaves you with, because it is the only thing you ever truly had. And from this truth, your real life begins. Say, continue for me, and I'll take you through the final transformation, the rise, the sovereignty, the inner mastery, and the breathtaking climax of what awakened people gain once everything they could never get back has been left behind. And then, somewhere in the middle of all this unraveling, after the illusions have fallen, after the roles have dissolved, after the old self has died in the silence of your own awareness, you begin to feel something strange, a presence, a steadiness, a center, a pulse inside your consciousness that was always there, but buried too deeply to reach. A faint but unmistakable truth. You are finally becoming yourself, not the self shaped by fear, not the self shaped by expectations, not the self shaped by survival, not the self shaped by the need to belong, but the self that existed before the world placed its hands on you. This emergence, this rebirth, comes with a clarity so sharp it cuts through every remaining thread that once tethered you to the life you thought you needed. And with that clarity, awakening strips away one more illusion, the illusion that you must cling to anything. You lose your attachments, not your connections, not your ability to love, not your capacity for intimacy, your attachments, this sticky, conditioned belief that anything outside you could ever complete you, define you, or secure your destiny. You stop clinging to outcomes. You stop clinging to specific timelines. You stop clinging to who stays and who leaves. You stop clinging to what works and what falls apart. You stop clinging to the image of a perfect life, because now you see nothing you lose on the path of awakening was ever meant to remain. The universe does not take without intention. It clears, it sweeps, it empties, not to punish, but to prepare. Because once the awakened soul becomes empty enough, empty of illusion, empty of attachment, empty of false identity, there is room for something else to take residence. Your essence, the part of you that cannot be touched by fear, cannot be shaped by trauma, cannot be stolen by betrayal, cannot be dimmed by rejection. Your essence, the eternal part of your being that existed before your name, before your pain, before your story. And the moment your essence rises, another irreversible loss occurs. You lose the need to be anyone but yourself. You stop performing, you stop impressing, you stop bending, you stop diluting, you stop shape-shifting to earn love, you stop shrinking to avoid judgment, you stop exaggerating your softness or hiding your strength. Your authenticity becomes your oxygen. Your boundaries become instinctive. Your decisions become clean. Your presence becomes anchored. Your energy becomes unmistakable. And with this authenticity comes another sacred loss. You lose your fear of being alone, because suddenly, perhaps for the first time in your life, you aren't alone. You are with yourself, the real you, the one you abandoned for years, trying to belong to others, the one you silenced, trying to keep the peace, the one you betrayed, trying to be loved, the one you hid because you thought it was too much, or not enough, or too intense, or too sensitive, or too awake. Now that you have reclaimed yourself, loneliness dissolves, solitude becomes sacred, silence becomes nourishment, isolation becomes recalibration. You stop chasing people and start attracting alignment. You stop chasing validation and start embodying truth. You stop searching for home and realize you are home. And this realization, this profound, grounding inner arrival, marks the end of an era. You lose your old mind, the anxious mind, the overthinking mind, the terrified mind, the people-pleasing mind, the scarcity mind, the wounded mind, the reactive mind. Awakening rewires you. It reconstructs you. It reprograms your perception. It unlocks levels of awareness that permanently override the old mental architecture. You begin seeing cause and effect clearly. You begin understanding the psyche deeply. You begin witnessing your emotions without drowning in them. You begin responding to life rather than reacting to it. You begin choosing your path instead of repeating your past. And once your mind awakens, another loss unfolds, one most people cannot comprehend. You lose your previous definition of happiness, because the happiness you once chased was built on ego, on survival, on societal programming, on fantasy, on external stimulation, on goals rooted in insecurity. The awakened do not seek happiness. They seek wholeness. They seek alignment. They seek peace. They seek truth. They seek meaning. They seek mindfulness. They seek clarity. They seek freedom. And in this search, you lose yet another thing you can never reclaim. You lose your fear of endings. Endings no longer terrify you. They no longer devastate you. They no longer define you. You begin to understand that endings are the universe's most precise form of redirection. Endings are the clearing of karmic cycles. Endings are the pruning of dead timelines. Endings are the release of congested energy. Endings are the liberation of your future. Awakened people stop resisting endings because they finally understand that life cannot give them what they're destined for, as long as they cling to what's expired. And then, almost silently, awakening removes one final layer from the landscape of your inner world. You lose the illusion of control. You stop believing you can micromanage the universe. You stop believing you can force outcomes. You stop believing you can script the perfect journey. You stop believing you can manipulate timing. You stop believing you can guarantee safety. Awakening destroys the ego's fantasy of control and replaces it with something far more powerful. Trust, not blind trust, not naive trust, not childish trust, but a grounded, embodied trust that comes from having walked through darkness and realizing you always survive. A trust that comes from listening to your intuition and witnessing how it never fails you. A trust that comes from losing everything false and discovering you can rebuild from truth. A trust that comes from collapse and resurrection. And it is this trust, this peaceful surrender, that opens the final door. Once awakening has taken everything that was not aligned with your soul, it leaves you with the only thing that was ever truly yours, the beginning of your real life. Say, continue for me. If you want the final climax, the rise, the authority, the sovereign power, and the irreversible transformation that awakened people gain after losing everything they can never get back. And when the transformation reaches its final threshold, after the shedding, after the grief, after the dismantling of everything false, you arrive at a moment so quiet, so profound, so unmistakably sacred that you almost miss it. A moment where you're no longer fighting life, no longer running from yourself, no longer bargaining with fate. A moment where you realize you have crossed an invisible border that most people never reach. A moment where the losses stop feeling like wounds and start feeling like liberation. A moment where you understand fully and finally everything you lost was exactly what was keeping you from becoming who you truly are. And now, with all the illusions stripped, with all the false identities burned away, with all the attachments dissolved, you feel something you haven't felt since before the world taught you fear. Inner silence, not emptiness, not numbness, not dissociation, but silence. A silence that holds you, a silence that strengthens you, a silence that feels like standing in the center of your soul without shaking. This silence is the signal that you have crossed into the territory reserved only for awakened beings. And from here, from this inner altitude, you begin to understand the final truth of what awakened people lose, that they can never get back. You lose the old world, not because it rejects you, but because you outgrow its entire architecture. You outgrow the conversations. You outgrow the environments. You outgrow the expectations. You outgrow the narratives. You outgrow the illusions. You outgrow the version of reality that was built for people who still need permission to live. You can never again live unconsciously. You can never again tolerate mediocrity. You can never again collapse into distraction. You can never again betray your intuition. You can never again ignore the knowledge you've earned. You can never again shrink to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. The old world becomes too small for the soul that has returned to its full size. And that is the greatest loss of all, and the greatest blessing, because losing the old world is what makes space for the new one. A world where your intuition is your compass, a world where your truth is your foundation, a world where your peace is your priority, a world where your boundaries are your protection, a world where your purpose is your path, a world where your authenticity is your power, a world where your self-respect is the air you breathe, a world where your connections are reciprocal, aligned, and nourishing, a world where your presence transforms every room you enter, a world where you no longer chase, you attract, you no longer force, you allow, you no longer fear, you understand, you no longer cling, you trust. And in this new world, you finally gain what all awakened souls gain. After losing everything they were never meant to keep, you gain yourself, the real self, the whole self, the self beneath the masks, the self beneath the wounds, the self beneath the conditioning, the self beneath the fear. You gain a self that no one can manipulate, because you now see through manipulation. You gain a self that no one can use, because you no longer betray your boundaries. You gain a self that no one can control, because you no longer fear the unknown. You gain a self that no one can diminish, because you no longer tie your worth to anyone's validation. You gain a self that no one can abandon, because you have returned to yourself so completely that solitude feels like home. This is what awakening gives you after it has taken everything else. It gives you your life back. But this time, you live it consciously. You live it intentionally. You live it authentically. You live it fearlessly. You live it with your eyes open, your heart unarmored, and your soul uncompromised. And that is why the losses are permanent, because they were never meant to be part of who you are becoming. What awakened people lose are the parts of themselves that were built from fear. What awakened people gain is everything that was waiting behind that fear all along. And now, standing here in your clarity, in your sovereignty, in your unshakable truth, you finally realize you did not lose anything. You returned everything that was never yours. And what remains is the one thing you can never lose again, your awakened self.